She dressed dirty for a blind date, unaware he was a billionaire who'd fall for her at first sight. Nora Wells stood at the corner of 8th Avenue, clutching the strap of her worn canvas bag as the evening breeze tugged at her faded grey dress. The fabric had seen better days, much better days, but tonight, that was exactly the point. She watched well-dressed couples pass by, heading toward the warm glow of the restaurant across the street, and felt her stomach twist into a familiar knot of dread and determination. This was it, her last blind date, her last attempt at letting someone in. Everyone had told her she was making a mistake. Her best friend Rachel had practically begged her over the phone that morning, voice rising with each plea. "Nora, please, just wear the blue dress, do your hair, put on a little makeup. Give yourself a chance." But Nora had said no, not because she didn't care about making a good impression. She cared too much. She had cared so many times before, and each time, caring had left her sitting alone at a table, watching a man's face change the moment he realized she wasn't what he expected. She had been hurt before by men who loved appearances more than they could ever love a person. Men who smiled and laughed and made promises until they saw where she lived, until they learned she worked double shifts just to help her younger brother get through school, until they understood she didn't come from money and never would. Those men always disappeared. Sometimes quickly, with sudden excuses about early meetings or family emergencies. Sometimes slowly, with texts that grew shorter and colder until they stopped altogether. So tonight, Nora made a quiet decision that felt both terrifying and liberating. She would show up exactly as she was. No pretending, no polished version of herself that would crumble under scrutiny. She wore the faded dress, old flats that pinched her left toe, and tied her hair back carelessly with a rubber band she'd found in her kitchen drawer. No perfume, no makeup, no armor. If the man sitting in that restaurant took one look at her and left, she wouldn't stop him. She wouldn't chase. She wouldn't apologize for being herself anymore. Across town, in the leather interior of a sleek black car parked 2 blocks from the same restaurant, Caleb Reed sat staring at his phone screen without really seeing it. His driver had asked twice if he was ready to go in, and twice Caleb had said, "Just a minute." He hated blind dates with a passion that bordered on irrational. Every single one followed the same script. A woman who either recognized his last name immediately and turned into someone performing for an audience, or a woman who didn't know who he was yet but would find out eventually, and then everything would change. It always changed. Caleb Reed, founder and CEO of Reed Capital, one of the largest private equity firms in the state. The man whose name appeared in business magazines, whose investments moved markets, whose net worth was calculated in billions, with a B that felt more like a burden than a blessing when it came to matters of the heart. He never told anyone who he really was on first dates. He used his first name only, mentioned vaguely that he worked in investments, and kept his answers short. Tonight would be no different. He planned to sit through dinner, be polite, eat quickly, and leave early with some excuse about an early morning meeting. He had it down to a science. Then his phone buzzed with a text from his assistant. She just arrived, grey dress, near the entrance. Caleb looked up through the tinted window and saw her. She stood on the sidewalk across the street, and for a moment, he thought she might turn around and leave. She looked nervous, uncertain, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear with fingers that trembled slightly. Her dress was simple, almost plain, and her shoes had clearly walked many miles. She didn't sparkle. She didn't command attention. She looked tired in a way that spoke of real life, real struggles, real weight carried on shoulders that seemed too small for it all. Something in his chest tightened unexpectedly. He watched her take a deep breath, square her shoulders, and cross the street toward the restaurant. There was something honest in the way she moved, something that didn't try to be noticed or admired. She was just walking, just existing, just trying. Caleb got out of the car. Before we dive deeper into what happened that night, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is right now. And if you love emotional, real-life style love stories that teach us something meaningful about connection and worth, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss a story like this. Trust me, you'll want to see where this goes. The restaurant was called Meridian, a mid-range Italian place with warm lighting and cloth napkins that Nora's friend had suggested because it was nice but not intimidating. Nora pushed through the heavy wooden door and was immediately hit with the smell of garlic, basil, and bread. Soft jazz played from hidden speakers. Couples sat close together at candle-lit tables. Everyone looked comfortable, confident, like they belonged. Nora felt like an imposter. She scanned the room, heart hammering, and spotted him immediately from the description Rachel had given her. Tall, dark hair, sitting alone near the window booth. He wore a simple button-down shirt, no tie, and he was looking at his phone with an expression that seemed both distant and tired. That had to be him. Nora forced her feet to move, weaving between tables, very aware of the way her old flat squeaked slightly against the polished floor. A woman at a nearby table glanced at her dress, then looked away quickly. Nora felt heat rise to her cheeks. When she reached the booth, the man looked up. Their eyes met. For just a second, the noise of the restaurant seemed to fade. His eyes were dark, intense, and they didn't dart away the way she expected. They didn't scan her outfit with quick judgment. They just looked at her face, searching for something she couldn't name. "Hi," Nora said softly, gripping her bag strap tighter. "I'm Nora." He stood immediately, and she realized he was taller than she'd expected. "Caleb," he said, extending his hand. His handshake was firm but not aggressive, warm. He gestured to the seat across from him, and Nora slid into the booth quickly, tucking her bag beside her and folding her hands in her lap. She kept her eyes down, bracing herself for the moment when disappointment would cross his face. But when she finally looked up, he wasn't frowning. He wasn't checking his watch or glancing toward the door. He was studying her with an expression she couldn't quite read, something between curiosity and fascination. "Have you been here before?" he asked, his voice low and even. "No," Nora admitted. "My friend recommended it. She said the pasta is good." "It is," Caleb said, and a small smile touched the corner of his mouth. "I hope you're hungry." Nora nodded, though her stomach was too knotted with anxiety to feel actual hunger. A waiter appeared with menus and water glasses, rattling off specials in a practiced rhythm. Nora barely heard him. She was too busy trying to figure out what was happening. Why wasn't he leaving? Why wasn't he making an excuse? "So," Caleb said, once the waiter left, leaning forward slightly, "tell me about yourself, Nora." It was such a simple question, but it landed like a test. Nora had answered this question a dozen times, on a dozen failed dates, and every time, she'd watched interest drain from a man's face as she talked about her life. But something about the way Caleb asked it felt different. He wasn't filling silence. He actually seemed to want to know. "I work at a bookstore," Nora said carefully, watching his reaction. "Mitchell's, over on Laurel Street. I've been there about 4 years now." Caleb nodded. "I know that place. The one with the blue awning and the cat that sits in the window." Nora blinked in surprise. "Yes, that's Mr. Darcy. He's the unofficial store mascot. Does he actually let people pet him, or is he one of those cats that just judges everyone from a distance?" A laugh bubbled up before Nora could stop it. "He's very judgmental. He only likes people who buy classics." Caleb smiled, a real smile this time that reached his eyes. "Good taste." The waiter returned to take their orders. Nora chose the cheapest pasta on the menu out of habit, and Caleb ordered something she didn't quite catch because she was too busy trying to process the fact that this felt almost normal. Easy, even. "Do you like working there?" Caleb asked once they were alone again. "At the bookstore?" Nora hesitated. Most people asked this question as a polite formality before moving on to talk about themselves. But Caleb's gaze was steady, patient, like he had all the time in the world to hear her answer. "I do," she said honestly. "It's quiet. I like recommending books to people and watching them get excited about a story. Plus, I get to bring home damaged books for free, which my little brother loves." "You have a brother?" "Yeah, Tyler. He's 16. Nora felt herself relax slightly as she talked about him. "He's obsessed with graphic novels right now. Superheroes, mostly. I think he owns every Spider-Man comic ever published." "Smart kid," Caleb said. "Spider-Man's the best one." Nora smiled despite herself. "You're a comic book person?" "Used to be. I didn't have much growing up, but I had a box of old comics my uncle gave me. I read them until they fell apart." There was something in his voice when he said it, something that hinted at a past he wasn't quite ready to share, but wanted her to know existed. Nora felt a small crack form in the wall she'd built around herself. "What about you?" she asked, surprising herself with her own boldness. "What do you do?" Caleb's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "I work in investments, corporate finance, acquisitions, that kind of thing. It was vague, but Nora didn't push. She knew what it felt like to want to keep certain things close to your chest, at least until you knew whether the person across from you was safe. "Do you like it?" she asked instead. Caleb considered this for a moment. "It's complicated. I'm good at it. It pays well. But sometimes I wonder if I'm building something meaningful or just moving money around." Nora hadn't expected that kind of honesty. Most men on first dates talked about their jobs like they were auditioning for a promotion, all confidence and accomplishments. Caleb sounded almost tired of his own success. Their food arrived, and they ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Nora snuck glances at him between bites, trying to figure him out. He had an ease about him that didn't match the careful way he chose his words, like he was used to being watched but had learned to hide in plain sight. "Can I ask you something?" Caleb said suddenly. Nora's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Sure. Why did you agree to this blind date?" The question caught her off guard. She set her fork down carefully, buying time. How much truth could she afford to give? "My friend set it up," Nora said slowly. "She worries about me, thinks I work too much and don't get out enough." "Is she right?" "Probably." Nora managed a small smile. "I do work a lot, double shifts most weeks, between the bookstore and helping Tyler with school stuff and making sure bills get paid. There's not much time left over." She waited for the usual response, the subtle withdrawal, the change in posture that signaled a man realizing she had baggage, responsibilities, a life that couldn't revolve around him. But Caleb just nodded thoughtfully. "That sounds exhausting." "It is sometimes," Nora admitted, "but it's worth it. Tyler's a good kid. He deserves a chance to finish school without worrying about money." "What about your parents?" Nora's chest tightened. "My mom passed away 3 years ago, cancer. And my dad, he left when I was 12, so it's just us." She'd said the words so many times they should have felt rehearsed, but they still carried weight. She watched Caleb's face carefully, waiting for pity or discomfort or the awkward subject change that usually followed. Instead, he said quietly, "I'm sorry. That's a lot to carry." Not, "I'm sorry for your loss," in that automatic way people did. Just acknowledgement, simple and real. Nora felt something shift inside her chest, like a door she'd locked tight was starting to ease open just a crack. "What about you?" she asked, needing to move away from the heaviness. "Any family?" "My parents are still around," Caleb said. "They live upstate. We don't talk as much as we should, but we're on good terms. No siblings, though. It was just me." "Did you want siblings?" "Sometimes. It would have been nice to have someone to share the pressure with." "Pressure?" Caleb looked like he wanted to say more but stopped himself. "Just expectations. You know how parents can be." Nora didn't entirely know her own parents had provided the opposite problem, absence rather than expectation, but she nodded anyway. They talked through the rest of dinner, and Nora found herself forgetting to be nervous. Caleb asked questions that showed he was actually listening. He laughed at her stories about difficult customers at the bookstore. He didn't talk over her or check his phone once. When the waiter brought the check, reality crashed back in. Nora reached for her bag immediately. "Let me split it with you." Caleb's hand covered the bill holder before she could touch it. "I've got this." "No, really. I can." "Nora," his voice was gentle but firm, "I'd really like to take care of this. It's important to me." She studied his face, searching for condescension or pity, anything that would confirm her worst fears about tonight. But all she saw was sincerity. "You're not judging me, are you?" The words came out smaller than she intended. "For how I look, for what I do." Caleb's expression softened. He leaned forward slightly, holding her gaze. "I'm trying not to fall too fast." The words hung in the air between them like something fragile and precious. Nora's breath caught. She didn't know what to say. Didn't know if she could trust the flutter in her chest or the way her hands had stopped trembling for the first time all night. "We should go," she finally managed, though part of her wanted to stay in this booth forever, suspended in this moment where everything felt possible. Have you ever felt judged for how you look or where you come from? Share your story in the comments if you're comfortable. You never know who you might encourage. And if this story is speaking to you, don't forget to hit that like button. It really helps these stories reach more people who need to hear them. Outside the restaurant, the October air had turned cool. Nora wrapped her arms around herself, realizing too late that her dress did nothing against the evening chill. The street was quieter now, most of the dinner crowd having moved on to bars or theaters or home. Caleb walked beside her without saying anything at first, hands in his pockets, matching her slower pace. Nora kept waiting for him to make an excuse, to say goodnight and disappear into whatever expensive car was probably parked nearby. But he didn't. "Which way are you headed?" he asked instead. Nora hesitated. This was the moment when she had to admit she was taking the bus, that she couldn't afford a car, that her apartment was 45 minutes away in a neighborhood he probably wouldn't recognize. "The bus stop," she said, lifting her chin slightly in defiance of her own embarrassment. "It's just a few blocks down." She braced herself for the polite retreat. "Mind if I walk with you?" Nora turned to look at him, genuinely surprised. "You don't have to do that." "I know." Caleb met her eyes. "I want to." So they walked. The city moved around them in its usual rhythm, cars honking, distant sirens, the muffled bass from a club down the street. Streetlights cast long shadows on the sidewalk. Nora was acutely aware of every step, every breath, every second of silence between them that somehow didn't feel uncomfortable. "Can I ask you something now?" she said. "Fair's fair. Why did you agree to this blind date?" Caleb laughed, a short, slightly bitter sound. "Honestly, I almost didn't. I hate these things." "Then why show up?" He was quiet for a moment, considering. "My assistant set it up. She said I needed to get out more, meet someone who wasn't connected to work. I figured I'd suffer through dinner and go home early." "And now?" Caleb stopped walking. They were standing under a streetlight, halfway between the restaurant and the bus stop, and when he turned to face her fully, Nora saw something vulnerable in his expression. "Now I'm trying to figure out how to ask if I can see you again, without sounding desperate." Nora's heart did something complicated in her chest. "You don't sound desperate." "Good, because I'm serious." He took a small step closer, not invading her space but closing the distance enough that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes. "I've been on a lot of first dates, Nora, and I've never met anyone like you. Someone who shows up looking like they just finished a shift at a coal mine." The self-deprecating joke came out before she could stop it, her old defense mechanism kicking in. But Caleb didn't laugh. "Someone who shows up honest." The word landed like a key turning in a lock. Honest. All evening, Nora had been waiting for judgment, for disappointment, for the inevitable moment when this man would see through her and find her lacking. But he was saying the opposite. He was saying the thing she'd been most afraid to show him, her real self, unpolished and struggling and tired, was exactly what drew him in. "I don't understand," she whispered. "I know." Caleb's voice was soft. "And that's part of what makes you different." They started walking again, slower now, and Caleb began to talk, not about his work or his accomplishments, but about loneliness, about going to events where everyone wanted something from him, about women who changed the moment they learned his last name, their smiles becoming calculated, their conversations becoming performances. "I stopped telling people who I really am," he said. "It's easier that way. Safer." "Safer from what?" "From people who love what I have more than who I am." Nora thought about this. "Is that why you were so vague about your job?" "Yeah." He looked almost embarrassed. "I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to lie. I wanted someone to meet me first, before all the rest of it." "I get that," Nora said. And she did. Wasn't that exactly what she'd done by showing up in her old dress? She'd wanted someone to see her, not the polished version that would crumble under pressure. They reached the bus stop, a small covered bench with a flickering light and a posted schedule that was mostly lies. Nora checked her phone. 8 minutes until the next bus. 8 minutes left of whatever this was. Caleb sat on the bench, and after a moment's hesitation, Nora sat beside him. Not too close, but not far either. Close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body in the cool evening air. "Tell me about this dream cafe," Caleb said suddenly. Nora blinked. "What? Earlier, you mentioned something about a reading cafe. Tell me about it." No one had ever asked her to elaborate on that dream. Most people nodded politely and changed the subject, treating it like a silly fantasy she'd outgrow. "It's probably stupid," Nora started. "Try me." So she told him about the cafe she'd imagined since she was Tyler's age, a place with comfortable chairs and warm lighting where people could come to read without being rushed, where books lined the walls and coffee was affordable and loneliness wasn't allowed through the door, a place where someone like her teenage self, hiding from a chaotic home life, could have found refuge. "I think about the layout sometimes," she admitted, feeling foolish but unable to stop now that she'd started. Big windows for natural light, mismatched furniture so it feels lived in, a kid's corner with beanbags, maybe a small stage for poetry readings or book clubs. What's stopping you? Nora laughed, but there was no humor in it. Money, experience, time, common sense. Pick one. What if those weren't obstacles? But they are. What if they weren't? Caleb pressed gently. If someone believed in that dream with you, what would be the first step? The question caught her off guard. No one had ever talked about her dream like it could be real, like it was a plan waiting to happen rather than a fantasy to be quietly mourned. I guess, finding the right location, Nora said slowly, letting herself imagine it for just a moment. Somewhere with good foot traffic, but not too expensive. Maybe near a university or a park. What else? Building a collection. I'd want a mix of classics and new releases, but also books that are hard to find elsewhere. The kind that make people feel like they've discovered something special. Caleb nodded, listening with that same intense focus he'd shown all evening. You've really thought about this? I have a lot of time to think during double shifts. Her bus appeared in the distance, its headlights cutting through the darkness. Nora felt a sudden, desperate urge to let it pass, to stay on this bench and keep talking to this man who somehow made her dreams sound possible. But that was dangerous thinking. She'd learned that lesson before. The bus pulled up with a hydraulic hiss. The doors opened. Nora stood, shouldering her bag. I should go. Caleb stood too. Nora. She turned back. I don't care how you dress tonight, he said, and his voice carried a weight that made her believe he meant every word. I care about who you are. For the first time in longer than she could remember, Nora felt tears prick the corners of her eyes. Not sad tears. Something else. Something that felt dangerously close to hope. Thank you for dinner, she managed. And for walking me here. And for listening. Can I call you? You don't have my number. Caleb pulled out his phone with a small smile. An oversight we should probably correct. Nora recited her number, and he typed it in carefully. The bus driver cleared his throat impatiently. I have to go, Nora said. I know. But neither of them moved. Finally, Nora forced herself to climb the bus steps. She found a seat by the window and looked out to see Caleb still standing on the sidewalk, hands in his pockets, watching as the bus pulled away. She pressed her palm against the cool glass and allowed herself to believe, just for a moment, that maybe this time could be different. If someone ever made you feel worth loving just as you are, hold on to that feeling. And if you're still waiting for that kind of love, don't lose hope. If this part of the story moved you, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss more stories like this one. Nora barely slept that night. She lay in her small bed in the apartment she shared with Tyler, staring at the ceiling and replaying every moment of the evening. Every word Caleb had said, every look, every pause. Her phone sat on her nightstand, silent and dark, and she kept glancing at it like it might suddenly light up with a message. By morning, nothing had changed. She told herself it didn't matter. One good date didn't mean anything. He'd probably wake up and realize he could do better, find someone with a career and a nice apartment and a life that didn't revolve around survival. That's what they all did eventually. But a small, stubborn part of her heart refused to accept that logic. Tyler emerged from his room around 9, hair sticking up in 3 different directions, wearing his favorite worn hoodie. You're up early, he observed, raiding the refrigerator. How was the date? It was fine. Tyler turned to look at her, a carton of orange juice halfway to his mouth. Fine good or fine bad? Just fine. Liar. You have that look. What look? The one where you're trying not to hope for something. Tyler took a long drink straight from the carton, a habit Nora had given up trying to break. So he was decent. He was. Different, Nora admitted. He didn't leave when he saw me. He actually listened. He walked me to the bus stop. Tyler's eyebrows rose. And you're waiting for him to text. I'm not. You've checked your phone 17 times since I came out here. Nora threw a dish towel at him, which he dodged easily. Shut up and eat breakfast. But Tyler was right. She was waiting, hoping, terrified. The text came 3 hours later, while Nora was shelving books at Mitchell's. Caleb, good morning. I hope you slept well. I can't stop thinking about our conversation. Nora's hands trembled as she read it 3 times, analyzing every word for hidden meaning or polite distance. But there was none. It was simple, direct, and somehow that made it more terrifying. She waited 5 minutes before responding, not wanting to seem desperate. Nora, good morning. I slept fine. Thank you again for dinner. Caleb, would you want to do it again? Nothing fancy. Maybe coffee? Nora, I'd like that. Caleb, tomorrow afternoon? There's a place near Mitchell's if that works for you. Rosie's. Nora knew Rosie's. It was a tiny cafe 2 blocks from the bookstore, with mismatched chairs and mediocre coffee, and prices that didn't require a second mortgage. The fact that he'd chosen it, instead of somewhere expensive and impressive, made something warm bloom in her chest. Nora, 3 p.m.? Caleb, perfect. See you then. Nora put her phone away and tried to focus on work, but her mind kept wandering. She thought about Caleb's smile, about the way he'd looked at her like she mattered, about the dangerous possibility that maybe, just maybe, someone could want her exactly as she was. Across the city, in a corner office on the 43rd floor of the Reed Capitol building, Caleb sat behind a glass desk worth more than most people's cars and felt like a fraud. His assistant, Margaret, stood in the doorway with her tablet and an expression of barely concealed concern. You have the Bennett meeting in 20 minutes, the conference call with Tokyo at 4, and the charity gala tonight at 7. Your tux has been delivered to your apartment. Cancel the gala. Margaret blinked. I'm sorry? Cancel it. Send my regrets. Make a donation in my place. Mr. Reed, you're the keynote speaker. You can't just... I can and I am. Caleb stood, grabbing his jacket from the back of his chair. Something's come up. Is everything all right? Caleb paused at the door. I met someone. Margaret's expression shifted from concern to something closer to shock. In the 8 years she'd worked for him, Caleb had never once mentioned meeting someone, let alone cancelled an obligation for a personal reason. Should I do anything? She asked carefully. No, just clear my evening. He left before she could ask more questions. The truth was, Caleb didn't know what he was doing. He'd spent the entire night thinking about Nora, about her honest eyes and her worn dress, and the way she'd talked about her dreams, like they were precious secrets she was afraid to speak out loud. He'd been with women who could talk for hours about nothing. Nora had said more in 2 minutes about her cafe dream than most people revealed in months, and she had no idea who he really was. That thought had kept him awake until dawn. Eventually, he'd have to tell her about the company, the money, the public profile that made privacy nearly impossible, but not yet. Not until she knew him well enough that the truth wouldn't change everything, he hoped. The next afternoon, Nora left work 15 minutes early, telling herself it was fine because she'd worked through lunch. She stopped in the bookstore bathroom to check her reflection and immediately regretted it. She looked exactly like someone who'd been shelving heavy books for 6 hours, hair escaping its ponytail, a smudge of dust on her cheek, exhaustion making shadows under her eyes. She did her best to fix what she could, but there wasn't much to work with. Part of her wanted to run home and change. The other part remembered Caleb's words, I don't care how you dress tonight. I care about who you are. So she walked to Rosie's in her work clothes and told herself it was enough. Caleb was already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee in front of him. He stood when he saw her, and his smile was so genuinely happy that Nora felt some of her anxiety dissolve. I hope you like regular coffee, he said as she sat down. I took a guess. Regular's perfect. Nora wrapped her hands around the warm cup gratefully. Thank you. They talked for 2 hours. Not about anything earth-shattering, just life. Tyler's upcoming history test, a difficult customer at the bookstore who demanded a full refund on a book she'd already read, Caleb's terrible morning meeting with investors who wanted to triple quarterly returns without tripling the effort. Sounds stressful, Nora said. It is, but it's better than yesterday. Why? Because yesterday I didn't know I'd get to see you today. Nora's cheeks flushed. She wasn't used to directness like this, to someone saying exactly what they meant without games or pretense. Can I ask you something? Caleb said, his tone shifting slightly. And you can tell me if it's too personal. Okay. Why did you dress the way you did on our first date? Nora had known this question would come eventually. She took a sip of coffee, buying time, trying to find words for something she barely understood herself. I was tired of pretending, she finally said. I've been on dates where I wore my nicest clothes and put on makeup and did my hair, and the guys still left once they learned about my life. So I figured, why bother? If someone was going to leave anyway, let them leave early, before I got attached. And now? Now I don't know what to think. Nora met his eyes. You didn't leave. You're still here. And that scares me. Why does it scare you? Because I don't know what happens when you realize I'm not interesting enough to keep around. Caleb reached across the table and took her hand. The gesture was simple, but it sent electricity up Nora's arm. Nora, he said quietly, I've spent most of my adult life surrounded by people who think being interesting means being loud or impressive or entertaining. You're none of those things. Nora's heart sank. You're something better, Caleb continued. You're real. You say what you mean. You care about the people in your life more than you care about impressing strangers. That's not just interesting. That's rare. Nora didn't trust herself to speak. She just squeezed his hand and hoped he could feel everything she couldn't say. They stayed until Rosie's closed at 7. When they finally left, Caleb walked her to her bus stop again, and this time when the bus came, he asked, Can I see you this weekend? I work Saturday. Sunday then. Let me take you somewhere. Somewhere fancy? Nora asked, half joking. Somewhere you'll like, Caleb smiled. Trust me? Nora thought about it. Trust was dangerous. Trust led to disappointment. But standing there under the streetlight with this man, who'd shown her more genuine interest in 2 dates than most people managed in months, she found herself nodding. Okay, I trust you. Sunday morning, Caleb picked her up in a car that was nice but not ostentatious, a dark sedan that could have belonged to anyone. Nora was grateful for that. She'd been half afraid he'd show up in something flashy that would announce to her entire neighborhood that she was dating out of her league. Where are we going? She asked as he pulled away from the curb. You'll see. They drove for 40 minutes, leaving the city behind and heading into the countryside. Trees began to outnumber buildings. The air coming through the cracked window smelled like grass and earth instead of exhaust. Finally, Caleb turned onto a gravel road and parked in front of a small building with a hand-painted sign. Riverside Community Library. Book sale today. Nora turned to look at him, surprised. You said you wanted books that are hard to find elsewhere, Caleb explained. These sales usually have interesting collections. I thought we could look together. It was possibly the most thoughtful thing anyone had ever done for her. They spent 3 hours browsing tables piled high with donated books. Caleb pulled out obscure titles and read ridiculous passages out loud, making Nora laugh until her sides hurt. She found a first edition of a novel she'd been searching for and clutched it like treasure. They bought 17 books between them, and when Caleb tried to pay for hers, Nora insisted on splitting it. At least, let me get lunch, he said. They ate sandwiches from a deli across the street, sitting on a bench overlooking a narrow river that moved slowly through the town. It was peaceful in a way that made Nora's usual anxiety quiet down to a whisper. Thank you for this, she said. Really, this is perfect. Better than a fancy restaurant? So much better. Caleb shifted to look at her. Can I tell you something? Of course. I almost didn't come to that first date. I was sitting in my car, convincing myself to just leave, to send an apology text and go home. And then I saw you standing on the sidewalk, and something told me to stay. What something? I don't know. Instinct, maybe. Or hope. Or just exhaustion with the alternative. He paused. I'm really glad I stayed. Me too, Nora whispered. He kissed her then. It was gentle, careful, asking permission even as it happened. Nora leaned into it, her hand finding his shirt collar, and for a moment, the whole world narrowed down to just this warmth and possibility and the terrifying joy of being wanted. When they pulled apart, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. I need to tell you something. Okay, not today, soon. But there's something you should know about me. Nora's stomach tightened with familiar anxiety. Is it bad? No, just complicated. And I want to tell you in the right way. She wanted to push, to demand answers now before she got any more attached, but something in his expression stopped her. Whatever he needed to say, he was trying to find the courage. She understood that. Okay, she said, when you're ready. The following week passed in a blur of texts and phone calls and stolen moments between work shifts. Caleb sent her photos of interesting books he found. Nora sent him terrible puns she heard from customers. They talked about everything and nothing, childhood pets, favorite foods, embarrassing stories, hopes that usually stayed hidden. On Wednesday, Tyler caught her smiling at her phone for the dozenth time and said, You're really into this guy, aren't you? Maybe. Mom would have liked him. The words hit Nora unexpectedly hard. She set her phone down and looked at her brother. this almost man who was trying so hard to sound casual about something that clearly mattered to him. "Yeah," she said softly. "I think she would have." On Friday, Caleb called instead of texting. "Are you busy tomorrow night?" he asked. "Just the usual laundry and existential dread." "Why?" "There's something I want to show you, but I need you to dress up a little. Not fancy, just nicer than work clothes." Nora felt a spike of anxiety. How nice are we talking? A dress if you have one, or nice pants. "Whatever makes you comfortable." He paused. "I promise it's not intimidating. I just want to do this right." "Do what right?" "You'll see. Can I pick you up at 6? Nora agreed, though every alarm bell in her head was ringing. This was it. The moment when reality would crash in. He was taking her somewhere expensive, somewhere she didn't belong, and she'd feel out of place and small, and he'd finally see that she didn't fit in his world. But she'd promised to trust him. So on Saturday evening, she borrowed a dress from her friend Rachel, a simple navy blue number that was slightly too big, but could pass with the right belt. She did her hair carefully, put on the minimal makeup she owned, and tried not to panic when Caleb arrived exactly at 6. "You look beautiful," he said, and the sincerity in his voice made her believe it almost. They drove back into the city, and Nora's anxiety grew with each passing block. But instead of heading to the downtown area with its expensive restaurants and exclusive clubs, Caleb turned toward the waterfront. He parked in front of a building Nora recognized, an old converted warehouse that now housed small artist studios and community spaces. "What is this?" she asked. "Come see." He led her inside and up 2 flights of stairs to a space with large windows overlooking the river. The room was empty except for exposed brick walls, hardwood floors, and the warm glow of late afternoon sun streaming through the glass. "I don't understand," Nora said. Caleb turned to face her, and there was nervousness in his expression that she'd never seen before. "This space is for lease, 1,500 square feet. Good foot traffic from the art walk on weekends. Walking distance from 2 universities. Affordable rent because the building owner wants to prioritize community businesses over chains." Nora's heart started to beat faster. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because it would be perfect for a reading cafe." The words hung in the air between them. "Caleb, I can't." "I know. You can't afford it right now. Neither could I when I was starting out." He took a step closer. "But I also know that some dreams are too important to let die just because the timing isn't perfect." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I want to invest in your dream, not as charity, as a genuine business investment. You'd own it, run it, make all the decisions. I'd just help with startup costs and maybe some business connections for suppliers. And if you hate this space, we'll find another one. But Nora," he took her hands, "I've watched you light up every time you talk about this, and I think you could make something incredible." Nora felt tears threatening. "You barely know me. I know you're one of the hardest working people I've ever met. I know you care about making people feel safe and welcome. I know you have a vision that's been cooking for years. That's enough for me to believe in. Why would you do this?" Caleb smiled, but there was something heavy behind it. "Because I've spent a lot of years using money to make more money, and I'm tired of it. I want to invest in something that matters, someone who matters." Nora walked to the windows, looking out at the river and the city beyond. She tried to imagine it, tables and chairs, bookshelves along the walls, the smell of coffee mixing with old paper. She tried to imagine herself here, creating the space she'd dreamed about since she was 16 years old. It felt impossible. It felt terrifying. It felt like hope. "There's something you're not telling me," she said, turning back to Caleb. "You said you needed to tell me something complicated." He nodded slowly. "You're right, and you deserve to know before you make any decisions. So tell me." Caleb took a deep breath. "My full name is Caleb Reed, Reed Capital. I own a private equity firm. I have a lot of money." "Nora, more than most people see in a lifetime. And I didn't tell you because every time I do, it changes things. People see the money instead of me." Nora processed this information carefully. "How much money are we talking about?" "Enough that investing in a cafe wouldn't even register as an expense." "So when you said you worked in investments, I wasn't lying. I just wasn't being completely honest." He looked genuinely worried now. "Are you angry?" Nora thought about it. Was she angry? Hurt? Betrayed? She searched her feelings carefully and found something unexpected. Understanding. "No," she said finally. "I'm not angry. I did the same thing, in a way. I showed up to our first date, looking my worst on purpose, to see if you'd stick around. You hid your money to see if I'd like you anyway. We were both testing each other. And I do. Like you, I mean. Not your money. You. She walked back to him. But Caleb, I can't let you just buy me a cafe. That's not how this works. I'm not buying you anything. I'm offering a business loan with very reasonable terms. Terms? Like what? You pay me back when the cafe is profitable. No timeline, no interest, no pressure. Just a handshake deal between people who believe in each other. Nora wanted to say yes so badly it physically hurt. But doubt crept in, whispering familiar warnings. What if it fails? What if I fail? Then we'll figure it out together. Caleb took her face in his hands gently. Nora, I'm not asking you to have all the answers right now. I'm just asking you to consider the possibility that maybe, just maybe, you deserve to chase this dream. That night, Nora couldn't sleep again. But this time, it wasn't anxiety keeping her awake, it was possibility. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, and let herself imagine it all, picking out furniture, choosing paint colors, ordering her first shipment of books, serving coffee to tired students and lonely retirees and anyone else who needed a warm, safe place to exist for a while. Tyler knocked on her door around midnight. You awake? Yeah. He came in and sat on the edge of her bed like he used to when he was little and had nightmares. You're thinking about the cafe. How did you know? Because you've been talking about it since I was in elementary school, and now someone's offering to make it real. He paused. You're scared, terrified, of failing, of succeeding, of owing someone, of this not being real. Nora sat up. Tyler, what if he's only doing this because he feels sorry for me? Do you really think that? She thought about Caleb's face when he'd shown her the space, the careful way he'd explained his offer, the nervousness that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with hoping she'd say yes. No, she admitted. I don't think that. Then what's really stopping you? Nora pulled her knees to her chest. What if I'm not good enough? What if I open this place and nobody comes? What if I mess it up and prove everyone right, who said I should just keep my head down and be grateful for what I have? Tyler was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Mom used to tell me that you were the bravest person she knew, because you kept going even when things were hard, even when Dad left, even when she got sick. You just kept showing up and taking care of business. He looked at his sister with eyes that were suddenly very grown up. This is just another thing to show up for, and you're good at that. Nora felt tears slip down her cheeks. When did you get so wise? I learned from the best. She called Caleb the next morning. I want to see the space again, she said, with fresh eyes. And I want to bring Tyler. He should be part of this decision. Of course. When? Today, if possible, before I lose my nerve. They met at noon. Tyler walked through the empty space with his hands in his pockets, trying to look nonchalant, but failing to hide his excitement. The windows are good, he said. Natural light is important. Nora smiled despite her nerves. Since when do you know about natural light? I read. You work at a bookstore. I absorb information. Caleb had brought a folder with information about the space, square footage, utility costs, lease terms. He spread it out on the floor, and the three of them sat in a circle reviewing numbers while the afternoon sun moved slowly across the hardwood. You could fit maybe 15 tables, Tyler said, doing mental math, plus the kids' corner, and a long counter for people who want to work on laptops. The kitchen space is small but functional, Caleb added. Enough for a good espresso machine and some light food prep. Nora listened to them talk, these two males in her life planning her dream like it was the most natural thing in the world. And something shifted inside her chest. The weight of responsibility she'd been carrying alone for so long suddenly felt just a little bit lighter. I need rules, she said suddenly. Both of them stopped and looked at her. If we do this, I need clear rules. A contract, payment terms, everything official. She looked at Caleb directly. I need to know this is a real business arrangement, not a gift. Done, Caleb said immediately. I'll have my lawyer draw up something fair. You review it, change anything you want, and we'll go from there. And I need to be able to say no to your ideas without it being weird. Also done. And if this doesn't work out, the cafe or us, I need to know those are separate things. Caleb's expression grew serious. Nora, if things don't work out between us, the cafe is still yours. That's not conditional, but for what it's worth, I'm planning on things working out. Tyler made a gagging sound. Are you guys always this intense? Nora threw an empty folder at him, but she was smiling. The paperwork took 2 weeks. Caleb's lawyer, a sharp woman named Miss Chen, reviewed everything with Nora personally, explaining each clause in language that didn't require a law degree to understand. The terms were more than fair. They were generous to the point that Nora triple-checked to make sure she wasn't missing some hidden catch. There was no catch. Just Caleb, investing in her dream because he believed she could make it real. The lease was signed on a Tuesday morning in November. Nora held the keys in her hand and cried in the empty space that would soon become something she'd been imagining for half her life. Caleb stood by the windows, giving her space to feel everything. When she'd collected herself, he turned and smiled. Now, the real work begins. He wasn't kidding. The next 3 months were a blur of decisions and exhaustion, and the strange joy of building something from nothing. Nora reduced her hours at Mitchell's but couldn't quit entirely. She needed the steady income while the cafe took shape. This meant her days started at 5 and ended near midnight. Every moment filled with choosing paint colors, ordering furniture, interviewing contractors, designing a menu, and building a book collection. Tyler helped on weekends, painting walls and assembling shelves with the patient focus he usually reserved for his comics. Caleb appeared whenever his schedule allowed, which was more often than Nora expected. He wore jeans and old shirts and worked alongside them without complaint, installing light fixtures and moving heavy furniture and occasionally ordering pizza when everyone forgot to eat. "You don't have to do this," Nora told him one evening as they sat on the floor, surrounded by instruction manuals for an espresso machine that appeared to require an engineering degree to operate. "I want to," Caleb said. "This is more fun than most board meetings." "That's a low bar." He laughed and kissed her forehead, and Nora felt grateful for the 100th time that he'd stayed when he could have left. Their relationship had settled into something comfortable and real during these months. They still went on dates when time allowed, simple things like walks along the river or late-night diners. But most of their time together was spent in the cafe, building her dreams side by side. Nora learned things about Caleb she wouldn't have discovered otherwise. He was good with his hands, patient with complicated tasks, generous with encouragement when she felt overwhelmed. He made terrible coffee but excellent hot chocolate. He sang off-key to whatever playlist was running. He asked her opinion on every decision and respected her answers even when he disagreed. And slowly, carefully, she learned to trust that this was real. The cafe opened on a Saturday in February. They decided to call it Chapter and Cup. Simple, welcoming, exactly what Nora had imagined. A small crowd gathered for the opening. Tyler and his friends, Nora's co-workers from Mitchell's, some neighbors, and a reporter from the local paper who'd heard about the new community space. Caleb had insisted on staying in the background, not wanting his name or presence to overshadow Nora's moment. But Nora had other ideas. When it came time to say a few words to the assembled crowd, she stood behind the counter in her cafe, and took a deep breath. "Thank you all for coming," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "This place has been a dream of mine for a long time. And dreams usually stay dreams because they're too expensive, too impractical, or too scary to chase." She paused. "But someone taught me that the right kind of person doesn't see your dreams as silly. They see them as possibilities worth investing in." She looked at Caleb, who stood near the back trying to remain inconspicuous. Caleb Reed believed in this cafe before there was anything to believe in except some sketches and a lot of hope. He invested not just money, but time and faith and patience, while I figured out how to turn an idea into reality. And he did it without asking for anything in return except the chance to be part of something meaningful. Caleb's ears turned red, but he was smiling. "So this cafe exists because someone saw me, really saw me, and decided I was worth betting on." Nora's voice grew stronger. "And I hope this place can do the same for all of you. Whether you need a quiet corner to read, a warm cup of coffee on a hard day, or just a space where you're welcome exactly as you are, this is it. Welcome to Chapter and Cup." The applause was warm and genuine. People lined up to order coffee and browse the shelves Nora had curated so carefully. Tyler manned the register with surprising competence, while Nora worked the espresso machine, her hands remembering the training she'd practiced for weeks. Caleb finally made his way to the counter during a brief lull. "That was a beautiful speech," he said. "I meant every word." Nora wiped down the counter, suddenly shy. "Thank you. For all of this. For believing in me when I didn't believe in myself." "Nora," he waited until she looked up. "You did this. I just wrote a check. Everything else, the vision, the work, the heart of this place, that's all you. We did this, she corrected. Together, he smiled, that private smile that was just for her. Together. I liked the sound of that. The cafe closed at 8 that first night, and after the last customer left and the door was locked, Nora stood in the center of her dream, made real, and just breathed. Tyler had gone home to finish homework. The space was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic outside. Caleb wrapped his arms around her from behind. How does it feel? Terrifying, incredible, real. She leaned back against him. I keep waiting to wake up. You're not dreaming. I know. That's the terrifying part. She turned in his arms to face him. What if I can't sustain this? What if the opening day excitement fades and nobody comes back? Then we'll figure it out. Adjust the model, try different things, keep learning. He tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. But Nora, I've watched you work for 3 months. I've seen how carefully you chose every book, how much thought you put into making this space welcoming. People are going to come back. How can you be so sure? Because I keep coming back, and it's not for the coffee. Nora laughed despite her anxiety. The coffee's getting better. It is, but that's not why I'm here. She knew what he meant. She felt it too, this thing growing between them that was bigger than a cafe or a business arrangement or even the initial spark of attraction. Something solid and true that had been built alongside the dream, brick by brick, choice by choice, moment by moment. I love you, she said suddenly, surprising herself. Caleb's eyes widened slightly. Then he smiled, slow and genuine and full of relief. I love you too. Have for a while now. Why didn't you say anything? I was waiting for the right moment. Didn't want you to think I was saying it because of the cafe or the investment. Wanted you to know it was separate from all that. And now? Now seems perfect. He kissed her, soft and certain. I love you, Nora Wells. I love your stubborn independence and your ridiculous work ethic and the way you believe in people. I love that you showed up to our first date in an old dress because you were too tired of pretending. I love who you are. Nora felt tears slip down her cheeks, but they were happy tears this time. Tears of relief and joy and the overwhelming gratitude of being truly seen and loved anyway. I love you too, she whispered against his lips. Even though you make terrible coffee and can't carry a tune and have more money than sense. He laughed. Fair assessment. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other in the quiet cafe while the city moved on outside. And Nora thought about how she'd almost skipped that blind date, how she'd almost let fear and past disappointments rob her of this love and partnership, and a dream realized. Chapter and Cup thrived, not overnight, and not without challenges, but steadily and genuinely. Regular customers became familiar faces, the elderly man who came every Tuesday for black coffee and mystery novels, the college student who studied for hours over a single latte, the young mother who brought her toddler to the kids' corner every Saturday morning. Nora learned their names, their preferences, their stories. She made the space exactly what she'd imagined, a haven for anyone who needed one. Tyler took a part-time job at the cafe after school, saving money for college. He was surprisingly good with customers, especially the teenagers who came in groups and tried to seem cooler than they felt. He understood that particular brand of awkward. Caleb continued to be involved, but in the background way they'd agreed on. He helped with business strategy and introduced Nora to suppliers, but he never overstepped or made decisions without her input. It was her cafe, her dream, and he respected that boundary completely. Their relationship deepened through the everyday moments. Sunday mornings spent reading the paper together. Weeknight dinners at her apartment where Tyler complained about homework and Caleb helped him with economics problems. Lazy Saturdays when the cafe was busy and they worked side by side, not needing to talk but comfortable in the shared silence. 6 months after the cafe opened, on a warm evening in August, Caleb asked Nora to take a walk with him along the river. They'd done this dozens of times, but something about his nervous energy made Nora suspicious. "What's wrong?" she asked as they strolled along the waterfront path. "Nothing's wrong. Why would something be wrong? You're fidgeting. You never fidget." Caleb stopped walking and turned to face her. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink behind him. "I'm nervous." "About what?" "About whether you'll say yes." Nora's heart started beating faster. "Yes to what?" He pulled a small box from his pocket, and Nora's breath caught. "I know it's only been about a year since we met, and I know we said we'd take things slow. But Nora, I've never been more certain of anything in my life." He opened the box to reveal a simple, elegant ring. "I don't need slow anymore. I need you. Will you marry me?" Nora looked at the ring, then at his face, this man who had seen her at her most honest and most vulnerable and had chosen to stay anyway. This man who had invested in her dreams and her heart with equal commitment. This man who made terrible coffee but excellent promises. "Yes," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, absolutely yes." He slipped the ring on her finger and kissed her while joggers passed by, and the river flowed steadily toward the sea, and the city hummed with its usual chaos. And in that moment, Nora understood something profound. She had dressed down for a blind date expecting rejection, but what she'd found instead was someone who saw past the surface to the strength underneath. She'd been so afraid of being judged, of being found lacking, that she'd almost missed out on being loved. "I can't believe you're mine," Caleb said against her hair. "I can't believe you stayed," Nora replied. "That first night, you could have left. You probably should have left. Best decision I never made." He pulled back to look at her. "You know what I thought when I first saw you? That I looked like I'd given up? That you looked real? Everyone else I'd ever dated seemed like they were playing a part, but you just looked like yourself, tired and honest and beautiful, and I thought, I want to know her. Not the polished version, just her." Nora pressed her face against his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady and strong. "You know what's funny? I thought dressing badly would protect me. Like, if I looked my worst and you still rejected me, at least I'd know it wasn't because I'd failed at pretending. And instead I found out that the right person doesn't need you to pretend at all." They walked back slowly, hands intertwined, talking about wedding plans and future dreams. Small wedding or large? Honeymoon somewhere warm or somewhere with good bookstores? Should they expand the cafe or keep it intimate? The details didn't matter as much as the certainty beneath them. They were building a life together, brick by brick, choice by choice, exactly the way they'd built the cafe. The wedding happened on a crisp October afternoon, exactly 2 years after their first date. They kept it small, close friends, family, and a handful of regular customers from the cafe who had become like family. The ceremony took place in Chapter and Cup itself, surrounded by books and the smell of coffee and the warm glow of string lights Tyler had helped hang. Nora wore a simple white dress that she'd chosen herself, elegant but unfussy, beautiful but real. Rachel had done her hair and makeup, but lightly, just enough to enhance rather than transform. When Nora looked in the mirror before walking down the makeshift aisle, she saw herself. Not a bride playing a part, just Nora, happy and loved and exactly where she was meant to be. Tyler walked her down the aisle, looking uncomfortable in his suit but proud enough that his discomfort didn't matter. "Mom would have loved this," he whispered as they approached Caleb. "I know," Nora said, squeezing his arm. "I feel like she's here anyway." Caleb stood at the end of the aisle, looking nervous and happy in equal measure. When Nora reached him and took his hands, she saw everything she needed to know in his eyes. Certainty, love, commitment, home. The officiant kept it brief and meaningful. They'd written their own vows, choosing words that captured not grand promises but honest ones. "Nora," Caleb said, his voice steady but emotional, "I promise to really see you every day for the rest of our lives, not who you think you should be or who others expect, but who you actually are. I promise to invest in your dreams, whatever they may be, and to stand beside you as you make them real. I promise to make terrible coffee and let you correct me, and I promise to love you honestly, completely, and without condition." Nora took a shaky breath. "Caleb, I promise to let you see me, even when it's scary. I promise to trust that you're staying, even when my past tells me people leave. I promise to build our life together with the same care we built this cafe, thoughtfully, honestly, and with faith that something beautiful can come from taking a risk. And I promise to love you for who you are, not what you have, every single day." The officiant pronounced them married, and Caleb kissed her while their small gathering applauded. And Nora thought about that nervous girl standing outside a restaurant in a faded dress, certain she was about to face disappointment, and wished she could tell her past self, "Stay, walk in, say yes to the coffee. Trust that sometimes the right person sees exactly who you are and loves you more for it, not less." 5 years later, Chapter and Cup had expanded into the space next door. What started as a small cafe with 15 tables had grown into a beloved community hub with a dedicated children's section, a small stage for poetry readings and book clubs, and a non-profit arm that provided free coffee and books to anyone who needed them. No questions asked. Nora still worked behind the counter most days, though she'd hired a small staff to help manage the growth. She loved the rhythm of it, making coffee, recommending books, creating space for people to exist without judgment or pressure. Tyler was in his third year of university, studying business, with the goal of eventually helping Nora expand Chapter and Cup into other neighborhoods. He'd grown into a thoughtful young man who understood the value of creating spaces where people felt safe and seen. Caleb had scaled back his role at Reed Capital, delegating more to his partners so he could focus on what mattered: family, community, investment, and the small non-profit foundation he and Nora had started together to help other dreamers launch businesses that served their communities rather than just profit margins. And on quiet evenings, when the cafe was closed and the city settled into its nighttime rhythm, Nora and Caleb would sit by the windows overlooking the river and talk about everything and nothing, the way couples do when they've built something real together. "Do you ever think about that first date?" Caleb asked one such evening. "All the time," Nora admitted. "I almost didn't go. I almost left before you arrived. We almost missed all of this." Caleb pulled her closer. "But we didn't. You showed up. I stayed. And everything else followed from that one choice." Nora thought about all the people she'd met through the cafe over the years, the lonely ones who'd found community, the struggling ones who'd found refuge, the dreamers who'd found encouragement, and she realized that her decision to show up honestly that night, dressed in her truth rather than her pretense, had created ripples far beyond just her own life. "You know what I learned?" she said. "What's that?" "That being yourself isn't the risk. Pretending to be someone else is the real gamble. Because if they fall for the pretense, you're trapped maintaining it forever. But if they fall for the real you, then you get to be loved as you actually are." Caleb kissed the top of her head. "Wise words from someone who once thought an old dress would scare me away." "It should have," Nora teased. "It did the opposite. It made me pay attention, made me see past the surface to who you really were." He paused. "You know what the best part is?" "What?" "Every day I get to discover new layers. You're never just one thing. You're complicated and surprising and real, and I never get tired of learning more." Nora turned to look at him. This man who had seen her exhausted and underdressed and uncertain, and had somehow recognized her worth before she fully recognized it herself. "I love you. I love you too, even though you still think I make terrible coffee." "You do make terrible coffee. And yet you married me anyway." "I married you because you make terrible coffee. It means you're honest about your limitations." She smiled. "Plus, you're pretty good at everything else." They sat together in comfortable silence, watching the river reflect city lights, thinking about how one honest moment had led to this, a life built on authenticity rather than pretense, on faith rather than fear, on the radical choice to show up as you are and trust that the right person will see you clearly. In a world that constantly tells us to be more polished, more impressive, more perfect, Nora and Caleb found each other by doing the opposite. She dressed down, he held back. They both showed up vulnerable and uncertain, and in that vulnerability they discovered something precious, the freedom to be loved as they actually were. Their story wasn't about a poor girl meeting a rich man and living happily ever after. It was about two people who'd learned to protect themselves from disappointment, she with low expectations, he with hidden identity, choosing to risk honesty instead. And finding that honesty, not pretense, was the foundation of everything worth building. The cafe still stands, warm and welcoming, full of books and coffee and people who need a place to belong. And if you visit on a Sunday afternoon, you might see Nora behind the counter, recommending books with the passion of someone who understands that stories have the power to save us. You might see Caleb helping a young entrepreneur draft a business plan, paying forward the faith someone once showed in him. You might see Tyler teaching teenagers how to make the perfect latte while sharing bad jokes that somehow land anyway. And if you stay long enough, you'll understand what makes this place special. It's a space built on the radical belief that people deserve to be seen and loved for who they actually are, not who they pretend to be. That belief started with one woman brave enough to show up honestly, and one man wise enough to recognize that honesty was worth more than any performance. They dressed down, they stayed, they built something real, and they lived, Not perfectly ever after, but honestly and joyfully, and with the deep contentment of people who found each other by being themselves. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who needs to hear that they're enough exactly as they are. Hit that like button to help more people find these stories, and subscribe so you never miss tales about real love, honest connection, and the courage it takes to show up as yourself. Drop a comment and tell me, do you believe someone can fall in love with who you really are, not just what you show the world? Because somewhere out there, someone is waiting to meet the real you, and that's the person worth being. The end.